stop here. This is the place.
One of the things that I love is that two films idea of your life. And there's two stories you can tell. One that is safe and full of regret, and one that is risky and full of pride and joy. This place seems to be a stepping stone across that bridge that is so scary to walk across.
Hello? Hello? All right. Just press it again, starts. Oh. How did I get here? So anyway, last year, Anna had wanted me to speak last year, and I couldn't. I came for a day, and I'm not sure if anybody heard Ellen Bennett speak last year. So I didn't really know what this was about and how to do this and her high energy thing, and she played music, you jump around. And as soon as she did that, it crystallized in my mind. I know what I'm doing. This is like the song of my life. I knew exactly that I was going to, not that, and I had no preconceived notion of using a song, but this was our song in our wedding 35 years ago, and it's still my song in so many ways. So I'm always astounded sometimes at where we wind up, in our journeys that we start. So I just want to say first, before I get into my talk, I'm just humbled and overwhelmed with this whole experience and some of the talks I've heard and the things that people are doing. It's just amazing. I'm just, I'm sure we've all kind of talked about it, walking away from this, what do you do? It's just to grok this experience is I don't know, I haven't quite figured that out yet. Hopefully I will in the next few days. I grew up in Long Island, New York. When I was 11 years old, my parents moved out to the far east end of Long Island, a little town called Cutchogue. Does anybody know where Cutchogue is? A few people know. It's vineyards today. When I was growing up, it was all potato farms, and cabbage and cauliflower. And my family weren't farmers, but we grew up with that all around us. And you get to know about food and, going out to the fields after the potatoes have been harvested by the combine and picking up the small new potatoes. The smell of rotting Brussels sprouts, it took me years and years before I could eat a Brussels sprout. But the other thing is we grew up with water all around us. Long Island Sound, Peconic Bay, the ocean, and grew up hunting, fishing, clamming, swimming, snorkeling. The water was warm enough and clear enough in the summertime, and I would read books on marine biology and set up transets in my snorkel and, go spearfish with a little thing, and it was just all about that. So I decided to go to college for marine biology, and I went to Southampton College, which is on the South Fork of Long Island, New York, and got my degree in marine biology. And the funny thing is I never studied oysters. Never studied any kind of invertebrate zoology. It was all about fish for me. Salmon and striped bass and trout is really what I loved. And getting into that, I really got into fisheries biology. And even then in the 70s, you could see that we weren't going to, the wild fisheries of the world were not going to keep up with the demand. And that aquaculture was the wave of the future. And I was all over that because I was about food and I was about marine biology. And so I decided that was going to be my calling. That's what I wanted to get into. So I traveled cross country. This is the Badlands of South Dakota. Some of my favorite photos that told us. Anyhow, went back out to California. I had done one semester in a school out there and decided that it'd be a fun place to live for a few years. This is 1979. So started knocking on doors of all the aquaculture going on up and down the state. And the first job that I got was a oyster farm in Moss Landing down in the Monterey Bay area. And it was owned by a big corporation. I worked there 2.5 years. I quit twice. They had hired me back after I quit the first time. I started liking oysters and eating them. But more than that, I fell in love with and got hooked by this notion of shellfish culture because to me, oysters, for one, are more about place than any other food. We can't manipulate a bay or an estuary. You need a healthy place to grow good shellfish in. So in terms of environmental sensibilities, what more wonderful thing can you do than pursue something like that where you're growing food in a place that the environment needs to be healthy, the watershed needs to be healthy, all those kinds of things. So I like I said, worked there 2.5 years. The second time I quit, at that point in time, I had gotten married, and Deborah and I decided to go to Europe. I got hooked up some work on the front and back side of a 4-month trip over there. We called it the Accelerated Familiarization Program. So just got married and spent every day, every hour of every day together for 4 months. And we're still together, so I guess that worked. So I came back and still tried to sort out how I was going to do this. And it's funny because I still thought I'd go back east. And at that point in time, it was a lot harder to start a shellfish farm on the East Coast than it was on the West Coast. And I had a good friend out here who had started a distribution company in farm-raised shellfish, which not a lot of people were doing. And he's saying, look, you and I know nobody's doing what we know can be done here. And I've seen Tomales Bay while I was working with this other company and liked it. It's an hour and a half away from San Francisco. It reminded me a lot of the east end of Long Island. It reminds me more of the East Coast than any other place I've been in California. And so decided to start this company in Tomales Bay. And the funny thing is that you don't really give any thought to some of these things. Back then, if you were in San Francisco and you wanted to go to a nice restaurant and have half-shell oysters, they were from the East Coast somewhere. People would call them Blue Points. Blue Point, Long Island, at that point in time, was horrifically polluted. There hadn't been oysters out of it for decades. They were coming from maybe the Gulf or Delaware Bay, different places. Nobody ate Pacific oysters raw in the half-shell. Pacific oysters, which is what we grow on this coast, were grown in a way that they were bigger and not suitable for half-shell. People shucked them to be fryers or barbecues, and so we decided we were going to do this differently based on what I had seen in Europe. Not thinking that nobody would really think that's a good idea, but we went ahead and did that. And luckily, Billy, who was our distributor, my good buddy from college, was an incredible salesperson. And he really helped us establish that market. I started the company with our good friend Mike. Terry mentioned Mike. And I did that, purposely. I mean, when I work at something, I work really hard. I spend a lot of hours at work. I want to enjoy work and for work to be a fun place. And what better way to make it fun than to work with friends, right? Even given all the complications and stuff like that, it felt important to me to be around people I like day in and day out. So, and we had a lot of fun. I mean, we started this company with $500 between us. I think we borrowed $2,000 from our parents, borrowed a boat from another guy who was growing oysters in the bay. We called it the Flexible Flyer because it was a fiberglass skiff that had cracks in it, so if it got choppy, the whole boat went like this, and you were never sure if you were going to make it anywhere. And I was still living in Santa Cruz, so I was doing this route. I was working for my friend Billy, who was doing the wholesale end of things, to learn that end of it. I would get up at 3 in the morning. This is when I lived in Terry's front house. At 3 in the morning, drive up, meet in the airport, help him on a day of wholesale, sleep on his apartment floor, work the next morning, then drive up to Tomales Bay another hour and a half, work 2 days up there. I stayed in Mike lived in an old converted milking barn, and there was a little loft up there, John's little loft, where, it was me and the spiders, and stay a night or two there, and then come drive all the way back down to the city, work a day, and go back down to Santa Cruz. And it was just, didn't give it thought. I mean, it's just what I wanted to do. We did a really smart thing in the beginning. A lot of things I think happened inadvertently, but we really felt we needed to have a name that people would remember. Not just Tomales Bay oysters or Point Reyes or this or that. So we came up, there's an island in the bay called Hog Island. And we decided to name the company Hog Island Oyster Company. And I'll never forget, because I was still working for Billy in the wholesale end, and we're dealing with these old Italian guys down on the wharf, and they're like, oh, that's horrible. People think about pigs and shit. That's, we don't want to name your oysters that. And we kind of stuck to our guns. And today it's a trademark name. It's one of the most famous oyster names in this country. And, a lot of that has to do with everything we've done since. But I'm so glad we kind of stuck to our guns on that. And the way it started happening was that our first connections were to restaurants and it was, part of this is about right place, right time. I'd like to take all the credit for doing this wonderful thing, but we were in Northern California at a time when this whole California food movement was getting going. Our first 2 accounts were Chez Panisse and Zuni Cafe, and we asked them to put them on the menu as Hog Island oysters. The next thing we know, we've got a food writer calling us because they saw this oyster at Chez Panisse, and boom, 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 and the whole thing started happening. We also did some dumb things. Well, lots of dumb things, but one really dumb thing is we had met a gentleman who had been helping out a local restaurant that was in some financial straits, and he had grown up in East Coast clamming and was really thought he could help us. We thought, okay, we can scale this up now. We need to bring some money in to kind of help us scale up. And this gentleman gave us $100,000, and we gave him 50% of the company. And more on that later. That's going to come up. But then again, we did a really smart thing. As Terry kind of started telling the story already, is we knew we needed more technical skills than Mike and I had. And one of the things we had to deal with in Tomales Bay is rainfall closures. So everywhere in the United States that shellfish grow, you're regulated by water quality, which is in Tomales Bay usually very good, but when it rains, the bay can get closed to harvesting. And we were mainly harvesting just in the winter, so any kind of rainfall closure would cripple us. And we wanted to put this whole wet storage system, which is pumps and filters and bells and whistles and a lot more things than I understand. And so Terry had been working at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and I remember going down to his house, and it was a very safe place. You knew what the career path was going to be. It was well funded. It was very much like this, which Terry seemed to be having a little bit of a hard time. And I go, well, I've got just the opposite thing. Sky's the limit, and there's no safety net, and boom, and he jumped. So here we are. It's the three of us doing this, and we had a lot of fun. We really did have a lot of fun in those years, as lean as they were. Thank God our wives were all making livings, because we sure as hell didn't make much. And we actually were fond of saying we were running a thinly disguised daycare center. So we all had sons who spent a significant amount of time there, because where else were they going to go? We couldn't afford daycare or any of those kinds of things. So Terry's son Lucas spent time there. This is my son Zane, who's 28 now. This is Cesar. Cesar is the son of our first employee. Zane is now the farm manager in Marshall, and Cesar is his assistant manager. And this is Will from down the street, because, like I said, it was a thinly disguised daycare center. So anyhow, and Terry's son Lucas spent a bunch of time there, and we'd make wooden swords for him, and every couple hours you'd have to break up fights and stuff like that. But it was our place, and we could do whatever we wanted. You can see it was really funky too, the buildings and stuff. So here we are. But the arguments with the guy that we had given too much of the company to just really were wearing on us, to the point where we had to get ready to walk away from the company. We had a dissolution clause in our agreement, and started basically a court-supervised dissolution, and could not get this guy to agree to anything. He wanted every dollar he put in back and then some. He had bought real estate, some of the buildings we were leasing, wanted us to debt service them all. It was just a nasty fight, to the point where we had to stop planting oysters and start winding down the company, and literally had one foot out the door. We finally, out of the blue, this guy agreed to go into mediation and agree to get bought out. And at that point in time, we had a lot of people in the food and wine business who knew about us and really believed in what we were trying to do, and were very supportive of it. And a couple of them said, if we can, get this guy to agree to something, we'll help get him out and we'll restart this thing up. And we did that in '96. We did our first private offering, which is why we now have shareholders, and restarted the company back up. So meanwhile, it's interesting, these unintended consequences. So the tanks that we had set up to get around rainfall closures meant now we had oysters live in tanks on site. And at that point in time, we were just strictly wholesale. We were selling oysters to a distributor, our friend Billy, and then selling them to wholesalers. And most of it was going to the Bay Area. We were selling oysters all around the country, which was great, and really getting our market name out there. But it was hard to keep track of where they were and of quality, and making sure that the people who were getting them were people that we believed in. At the same time, because we had these live tanks there, we said, we can open up the gates and start selling live oysters to people. And we did that. And then somebody mentioned, gee, it'd be great if we could sit down here and shuck oysters. And so we put some picnic tables out and gave people knives and gloves. And then somebody suggested we put some barbecues out, some Weber's out, and we did that. And the whole thing just blew up. to the point where we got in trouble with the county and had to go through a whole 7-year use permit process. And today now, if you want to come to our place and shuck oysters on the weekend and get a picnic table, it's 4 months out in reservations. And it's I believe, has to do with people wanting to get close to their food, because the way that place is you see us bringing everything in, sorting the oysters, the tanks. It's right there where you are, and it's just an amazing, amazing experience. And so we, at that point, realized, wow, this could go somewhere. The first time ever, picked our heads up a little bit and said, okay, where are we going? And I think Mike and Terry and I think we actually spent some time up in Calistoga on a little semi-retreat, and kind of came up with this idea that we wanted to have more than one oyster farm. Because it's so much about place, you're also vulnerable if something happens at that place, right? So to be smart, we should have a farm in another bay somewhere, and maybe we should do an oyster bar. I always want to do something direct to the public, maybe a funky, rustic oyster bar out in the picnic area or somewhere, but we started visioning that where we wanted to go. Interestingly enough, at the whole time, the whole retail started going into the farm, where by 2003, half our revenue now was coming from people coming to the farm instead of us wholesaling all around the country. So we knew we had something there. The permits to fix the property, as you can see, was really funky. All these buildings were built in the 1860s and 1870s. There was no code septic system or water. We had a 100-amp knob and tube service. It was really hard. It was going to be a big lift to get this up to code to do anything. In the meantime, the Ferry Building went through this big renovation. Everybody been in the Ferry Building in San Francisco? Yeah, a lot of you. So the Ferry Building, which is again another story of taking funky old places and fixing them up, which has kind of been sort of our thread in a way, is they did a $100 million renovation to this historical building and then created a food hall on the ground floor. I got a picture of that. So we leased 1,000 square feet, opened an oyster bar there in November of 2003. This is Terry and I hanging the sign. I can't remember what's next here. There it is. There's some pictures. Sweet little spot. We all thought it would take us a couple of years to get up to speed. We had to have some staying power. We raised a little bit of money to do this. It had been a sketchy part of the city. Maybe people wouldn't come there right away, and we got our asses kicked. I mean, we blew through our 5-year projections in the first year, and it was hang on for dear life here. So now the company really has changed. So, and in the space of 1 year, we had doubled in revenue and doubled the number of employees. So, how do I work this? So, what's going on here? So, companies evolve and change. You don't think about these things when you start a company, but when that happens, what it needs of you changes. And Terry and I realized that, and our roles had to change. And Mike didn't in some ways, and there began to be issues around his role in the company and what we needed out of him. And in 2006, we parted ways, and that was extremely painful. I mean, I was in Mike's wedding, he was in mine, and it's still something that there's not a stretch of time that goes by that I don't think about him and what could be, but we created this thing. And it had momentum, and it had needs from us that needed to be addressed. And, so here we are. The other thing that you start to realize is that we had created this incredible company with something, a mojo or culture or soul, and all of a sudden we had a lot more people who we didn't know as well working for us. And I started doing a lot of reading, the soul of a business, growing a business, I can't remember some of the other ones about just how do people deal with this. So at the same time, we did some work. A good friend of mine teaches leadership at St. Mary's College, and he had gotten a grant to do these values workshop. His name is Ken Otter, and so he met with us, and we did work around, well, what are your values? Really interesting. You start looking at yourself, your personal values, and what do you want out of this company. And we thought, this is what we need to start doing. We need to start being more explicit about who we are instead of expecting the people around us just to get it by osmosis. So we started doing this work, and this is the value statement we came up with. We strive to cultivate a great farm-to-plate experience. We help and take care of each other, our customers, our communities, and our planet, and we have a lot of fun doing it. So we go, wow, we got this great statement. Okay, what do you do with it? How does that work from there? But at least it felt like we had gotten this down. I mean, this is something we really did believe in, taking care of people. We've been paying 100% of health insurance premiums for anybody who works over 20 hours in this company since way back then. And we just felt like, look at the people who are the hourly employees in this company. We're not going to pay them 50%. Those are the guys that need health insurance. So it gets a lot more difficult to do that as you get bigger and as the health insurance costs go up. But we really did start to feel that it's about people and taking care of people. In the meantime, we continued to grow a bit. We acquired more leases. Today we have 160 acres on the bay. You can see, this is what I love of it. Look how beautiful these places are we get to work. They're just a really dynamic, beautiful, living, breathing places, the bays that we get to grow oysters in. In late 2008, we opened a second oyster bar in downtown Napa. This is a totally different experience for us, right? Because we got our butts kicked in San Francisco. We opened this in November of 2008. 2009 was the worst year Napa had seen in decades, and we had to hang on for dear life for about a year and a half. But again, to me, this was a story that appealed because downtown Napa's got these great bones, and it's a story of restoring and enhancing, and can we make it into something? And now this is a bustling, bustling place, and we do a phenomenal business there. And I'm so glad that we decided to go into downtown Napa and be part of that story. The retail that we ran out in Marshall, we got our use permit to do the picnic area and everything, and realized that we don't want to just be in the picnic business. And we started fixing up the buildings and utilities, and we went back in and amended our use permit, and now have an outside oyster bar, which is what we wanted to have years and years ago. It's open Friday through Monday, funky little thing that people in the rain come and stand under the roof to eat oysters, and still have some picnic tables, because we'll never undo that. People would riot if they couldn't come out there and do that. So we have to pay attention to that. And then in 2013 or so, the Ferry Building came to us and said, hey, we're not renewing your neighbor's lease. How about this space next door to you? So in 2014, we shut down for 3.5 months, which was nerve-wracking. This is our big cash cow. And now it's a 2,700 square foot oyster bar that we call the Beast. This thing we go to 2 million oysters a year in this restaurant. And same story. When we shut down, we went to 2.5 times the space, twice the amount of seats, and we went, it's going to take us a while, but we'll eventually do double the business. Boom, right out of the gates, double the business. Had to turn one of our seating areas into a waiting line, because the problem with our old space is our waiting line went through our neighbor's space, and they were all getting pissed off and complaining to the landlord. So it's just an amazing, amazing place there. If you haven't been there, the whole building, in terms of the other food that's there and how they really tapped into Bay Area food producers. I mean, that was the MO for this building, and it really, really has worked. So here we are now. We have 200 people working for us. And, whoa, I almost forgot. So we also started eventually to think about, where's this other farm going to be? So this is a picture of our operation now up in Humboldt Bay, which is about 3 hours to the north of here. So we started looking into doing an operation in Humboldt Bay, another farm, and when we were looking at doing that, we began to realize there's been an issue with changing ocean conditions, right? Everybody knows about ocean acidification, too much CO2 in the atmosphere, and what that does is it makes it a little bit harder for oyster larvae to form shells, and it's been making it harder for oyster hatcheries to produce seed, and it's especially important on the West Coast because there's been a consolidation. There's only 3 hatcheries up and down the coast, and when people heard we were going to look for an operation in Humboldt Bay, a few people approached us in the industry saying, we think the West Coast needs another hatchery, and we think you guys should do it. I'm like, thank you very much. Hatcheries are really expensive and tricky to do, and we went for it, though. So this is an oyster nursery, these big rafts that have paddle wheels in them here. that just move water through to grow oysters up to like 1 inch or so in size. We just broke ground, actually just poured 270 yards of concrete yesterday on the hatchery building up there. And again, a fun story because this pier, what you need to do an operation like this is you need deep water, a pier, commercial infrastructure, power, all that kind of stuff that we don't have in Tomales Bay. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Humboldt Bay in that area up there, but it was a big timber area. And then it was big because there were pulp mills there. And it was a mess with pulp mills, right? And those all got shut down. The bay came back in huge ways. It's an incredibly healthy, productive bay now. And the pier that we lease, which is this 330-foot pier that goes out here, was a chemical dock for a pulp mill. And now we are growing beautiful, wonderful little baby shellfish in it. So, I mean, I just love that part of the story, that we get to repurpose these areas like this. So, it's fun. So, now we have 200 people. And we started really thinking more and more about this culture thing and how do we do this. And you know, we've got 15, 20 people in management in this company, and we embarked on this whole thing. And we started doing more reading, first off. I don't know if anybody is familiar with Zingerman's. People know who Zingerman's is? Zingerman's is a deli in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I had read about them in a book called Small Giants that I've told a couple of you about. The subtitle is Companies Who Choose to Be Great Rather Than Be Big. And attended a couple of their workshops around their management techniques and what they do. And if anybody knows, it's a great story. This guy, Ari Weinzweig, he was studying anarchy at Michigan and wound up going into business. And he has this great book called The Lapsed Anarchist Guide to Building a Great Business, which really appealed to me because I was never big on rules and systems and different things. But they sort of advocated in doing this whole guiding principle thing about really being more explicit about it and explaining what you're about. So we embarked, essentially it was a 2-year process with our leadership group. So that's sort of the way we run the company, is myself and Terry, along with our 3 operations people, our COO and our 2 restaurant division person and farm division person, started talking about this and then bringing it to our management group over the course, like I said, of a couple of years, involving our board of directors about who are we, what do we stand for? Oh, well, I forgot a few more pictures of Humboldt here. You can see some of the baby oysters in the hand there. So this is what we came up with. So the overall thing is the how matters, right? How we retrieve results is just as important as the results themselves. Business the right way, great food, exceptional service, authentic relationships, and fun is important, seriously. And there's a lot more definitions that go behind that, a glossary and stuff. But it's interesting because what you notice about this list, right, is there's great food in here, which has to do with the quality and what we're doing. All the rest of those are about people. And I guess in somewhere I knew this when we started this, but business, it was like, God, like a thunderbolt hitting me, business is about people. I don't care what you're producing. It just is amazing how it can come back around and you can get hit with something like that after all these years, that it's how we interact. So many of us interact in so much of our time in a day-to-day through business. So it should be about doing things the right way. It should be about being good to each other and all those things. And, the guy you buy this from should make some money, and you should make some money. And that's how it all works together. So it's interesting. We do these staff tours when we hire new people, and we bring them up to the farm, and they would go out in the water with either Terry and I, and we'd explain all about what we do to grow great oysters and a little bit about the company history. And now we've totally changed that. They spend a half a day, and we do that, and we talk about the history of the company, we talk about the mistakes we made, and then we all sit down and talk about just philosophy. And it's kind of the trick question time. It's like, what business are we in? And, a lot of people get, well, oysters and great food and agriculture, and it's like, no, it's about people. And it's about how we treat each other. And it makes it really interesting when you start to be really intentional about that. So we've really started trying to do our evaluations around these guiding principles. and realizing that maybe not everybody, people can talk about these things, but about doing them and being them is a different thing. You can, I think we're all guilty of this. Sometimes you can get caught up in business about results. And we were saying that, look, that results matter somewhere along the line. You have to make money. You have to be profitable. But what matters more is this how and how we treat each other. And we've had to part ways with a few people in our company who were with us a long time because we realized that maybe that wasn't really happening. Funny little story, side story is when you start looking into hiring for culture, there's all these different questions about, what questions you want to ask somebody if you're going to hire for cultural fit. And one of the questions is what is your superpower, right? And so we were asking this of ourselves. And mine, it came really quickly, my superpower is I believe in the best in people. That's why I can inspire people. My kryptonite is I believe in the best in people. And so I don't see it when it's not working. And how and that's why it takes a village, I suppose, is the term, to run a successful company, because you have to rely on each other for your shortcomings and what you don't see and others do, and that trust in each other to do that. But it's been interesting, to go through this and to really live that, and so here we are. And you may ask yourself, where does that highway go? And it's interesting. We've kind of talked about the guiding principles, and I mentioned small giants. When you're successful, and this is in the book here, you might read a little bit, is success puts pressure for growth. And a lot of people grow just to grow. And we call it reluctant growth in our company because we've been so scared of growth and what it can mean for the culture of the company. But at the same time, really realizing that there can be health in growth. It can make the company better and stronger, more resilient to go forward. So trying to find that sweet spot about how fast we grow. The biology part comes out of me because when you look at climate change and some of these things and systems resiliency, it's not change, and it's not the absolute level of change, it's the rate of change. And I've always felt like fast growth was very dangerous growth, so we've always tried to measure our growth out and turn down many opportunities to open up other oyster bars in places or franchise or do those things because it's not us. But we are probably still going to grow. We have a plan. We've done this. Now we do a visioning process. About every year now we revisit this vision, which is a 5- and 10-year vision for ourselves and for the company. And we want to get this farm going in Humboldt. We're already producing more oysters up there. We want to have one more farm, hopefully up in Washington State, because being connected with the industry up there where it's bigger, there's benefits to do that. And we can grow more clams, which we really need. And when you look at that and look at the model that we've come up with over these years, and we're finally financially successful, after a lot of years of struggle, it was about selling most of the oysters we grow ourselves, right? So, okay, if we're going to grow more oysters to be more resilient in different places, that means we need to open up more oyster bars unless we want to get back into this wholesale game in a big way. So we're looking at that now, where those would be and how we pick those areas. And we're just being very intentional and slow about it. We've been looking for a couple of years now and haven't really decided on where we're going to go. The other thing, it's funny when you start a business, you don't look out, I didn't anyhow, look out that far at all. And we've been faced with this word succession planning lately. I'll admit it, I turned 60 this year. Terry's a little bit older. And it's like, okay, what do you want? We have to start planning for this next step. And something we decided a long time ago, and there's lots of different ways to do this in business, is you could sell the business and go on to do something else. So we decided a long time ago that's not what we're trying to do here. We are hoping to build a 100-year company, a company that has a legacy and goes on doing the things we're doing. Part of what's really been interesting is I've always considered us sort of the young, cutting-edge people in the business. And now we have young guys in the business coming up wanting to meet us in terms of what we've done. And I'm like, whoa, that's a little weird. But you realize, when you get a little bit bigger like that, you can have an impact to the rest of the industry, hopefully, in terms of what we've done and how we do things. But increasingly now, it's about how we set this company up going forward. And remember, we have shareholders as well. So succession planning for us doesn't just involve the people working for us and making sure we're building capacity within the organization, which we are. Terry and I in our office had this saying, do we have enough oysters and do we have the right people? Every decision comes from those two things. But the other piece of it is succession in shareholdings. Because we're growing, we're not likely to be spending money buying shares back from people. And a lot of people don't want to sell their shares. Most of our shareholders own very small percentages and just love being part of this company. But some of them are going to sell shares to other people. And how do we make sure this doesn't go sideways or off the rails in a different direction 10 years, 20 years or so from here? So we started looking into that whole thing. And at the beginning of this year, we became a certified B Corporation. People know what a certified B Corporation is? So using business as a force for good. And part of becoming a certified B Corporation is if you are in a state that has a legal benefit corporation status, which California is, within 2 years you have to become a legal benefit corporation. We decided not to wait, and we put that to a vote of our shareholders in May, and overwhelmingly got that approved, and we are now a legal benefit corporation in the state of California. So what that means is as a CEO or as a board member or whatever, it's not just about shareholder returns. It's about stakeholders. And stakeholders are our community, our employees, the people we deal with, as well as our shareholders. We have to be financially responsible as well. And so here we go into the brave future in terms of hopefully charting the course to keep this on the path it's been and the path it keeps going. So thank you all very much. So.